Hi, I'm Anika. I'm a project manager in Venture and on the newsletter committee, and I'm here with Jeff, who's going to talk about starting a startup. And so, Jeff, I was wondering if you could just start by introducing yourself and your connection to Venture.
Yeah, of course. Nice to see you, Anika. So basically, I just graduated from Cal in the year 2020, and I graduated from the School of Business as an undergrad. And my connection with Venture is that I actually joined in freshman year spring, so that was spring 2017, and have been in Venture like since then. I was a consultant for 2 years, and I was a project manager for 2 years, and then I served as the development VP and finally president. So that's a little bit about myself and my connection to venture.
Great, thank you. And then I was wondering, I know you actually started Iqmart before you were in Venture. If you could talk a little bit about how you started it and what that was like being an entrepreneur in high school.
Yeah, of course. So Iqmart for just to give a little bit of information about that. So Iqmart is basically a speed cubing company that I started. So the way that I like to explain it to people is like I ask them, if I'm in an interview and they're like, "Hey, what is Iqmart?" I'd be like, "Okay, so have you ever seen someone solve a Rubik's cube like within 10 seconds, like on YouTube or something?" And they'd be like, "Yeah, of course I've seen something like that." And I'm like, "Cool." So that's actually called speed cubing, and that is sort of like this hobby sport that a lot of people do. And so the cubes they use are not like regular store-bought Rubik's cubes. They're actually like specifically made speed cubes for competition for people solving super fast. So then I was really into this back in the day as a kid, and like I went online and I couldn't really find like a good website that sold all the flagship speed cubes on the market. So I thought, maybe I can go ahead and create like fill this gap in the market. And at the same time, like I just wanted to have the largest collection of Rubik's cubes ever. Just like as a 12-year-old. So I went ahead and started this company. So I just basically took like $300 in my piggy bank. I bought a domain. I like designed a quick website on webs.com. It was really shitty looking, but since then, like I basically grew the company, and it became a global like market leader. We were the authorized dealer like for 18 industry brands, and we were getting customers from all over the world, and it became a lot bigger than what I expected. So that's a very little bit about the history between Iqmart, me, and how it grew.
Great, thank you. That's definitely a lot more productive than anything I did with my childhood allowance. I was wondering if there was a point in time when you realized that it was bigger than a hobby and you'd actually created a business.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great question. So basically, like I was just doing this thing at home in my room, and I thought that it was really cool. And I was like selling cubes. I was making a lot of connections with like, for example, YouTubers who like would review these cubes. And I started getting more involved in the speed cubing community as a whole. And because not only is that like my customer base, but also that is sort of where I was coming from as a speedcuber myself. So then I realized that my company was actually getting pretty big because one thing that is really like special about this industry is that all of the brands are like Chinese manufacturing brands. And as an Asian, like Chinese American, I was someone who was like one of the only people who could actually communicate with the brands themselves. So I actually created all of these like partnerships by directly communicating and forming like relationships with these Chinese brands. So what happened was I developed these really strong relationships, and they eventually started giving me these like premier cubes, these premier puzzles that would not be on the market yet. They will allow me to be the one to introduce it into the US market. And so that those partnerships and relationships is what made Iqmart so big. And then I started realizing that it got really big because like, I mean, as a kid, I wasn't even counting the numbers. I was just like, oh, selling is good. Like I did not like calculate profit margins or anything. what would eventually happen was I would come home from school in like middle school, and then like I have to pack like 70 orders like per day after coming home. And my mom's like, I crunched the numbers. We're actually like making a lot of money. And like my mom telling me that was the first time that I even thought about profits, which is really bad. But it just shows you like that I was definitely just a kid who was luckily like in a good position, um, and then like kind of became successful with this business just kind of due to luck, but also kind of due to chance.
Yeah, that's awesome. You talked about how you'd like come home from school and then have to fill all these orders. I was wondering, especially since a lot of our viewers are also interested in entrepreneurship and in school, what it was like balancing school, which is basically a full-time job, with also being like the CEO of a company.
Yeah, of course. So as a really small business, like I didn't have any employees to think about. Also, I was not very business savvy at the time, right? Because I didn't learn any official like business strategies. I didn't learn any business. I don't have any business knowledge at all. So I was not savvy about like keeping really like clear tabs with my financials, like coming up with super clear cut marketing strategies or like branding, like stuff like that. I kind of just did things impromptu. When it came down to balancing, I think like what I would do back in the day was I would just like do my homework, finish it as fast as possible, and then like just spend all of the rest of my time like instead of playing like video games or anything like that, um I would just spend all my time like working on this company. And at the time it felt like, you ever do something and you're so into it that you get into a flow and you don't even think about it as work, you're kind of just like working on something. So then that's kind of what I did, and every day I would just come home and like work on this company. And it was just so fun to me, and it was just like constantly what I was thinking about because I was building this thing that I was excited about. So it became a point where it didn't even feel hard to balance. And then when I came into high school, like my high school was super competitive, like Asian heavy community, college, I mean, sorry, high school. And so when that started getting really intense, I started needing more of my parents' help to help me like pack orders, for example, while still making the sort of executive decisions. Um, so it was initially very easy in middle school to balance it. But then starting from high school, when things got intense, like when I started taking more APs, like it definitely became a grind to do both the job and the school.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know you mentioned to me that you've started work on it more in quarantine since your full-time consulting job hasn't started yet. So
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you're able to approach the business differently now that you have a degree in business and you're a college graduate.
Yeah, of course. So there's a huge difference, right? Because before I'm kind of just like doing things willy nilly, like whatever feels right, whatever like things come up. Is like when a customer asks me about returns back in the day, I'd be like, "What is our return policy?" Like, I'll just think of one right now. But nowadays, like since I'm working, like since I have all this knowledge from venture, like doing so many different consulting projects, so many different like marketing, branding, just regular like business strategy projects through venture, as well as through other internships and just through like HOS courses. Like now, when I'm working on Iqmart, I am very like just more deliberate about everything. So like, where are my channels? Where like super data heavy now. I'm like making sure that I set up all these systems in place so that like I can get data in, and that will inform all my decisions later on. And I also think that venture has given me an identity in terms of like what type of business person I am, like what type of like I know that marketing and branding is super important to me now. So then that's like really pervades how I'm redesigning my like business strategy and the customer experience, shopping experience. So that's just like very quickly how it has completely impacted how I'm working on the website now. And like, I'm for sure it's definitely going to be better than what it used to be.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
My last question is just about if you have any advice for student entrepreneurs since you went through it yourself.
Yeah. So I think one thing about my entrepreneurial experience that it's like that is super unique is that it was really by myself. I think most entrepreneurial ventures are really only successful and really like yeah, they're only really successful when you like work with others, right? When you bring like different people to the team. And so based on like my work in venture and also just talking to other like entrepreneurs, young entrepreneurs, I think actually despite my experience, like something that you should really, really do is find people that you really work well with that like brings a different skill set. So I think that's actually probably the most important thing that I would say. But from my own experience of just working by myself, like the most it sounds very cliche, but like really you just like gotta not think too much about it, especially like as a consultant by training, right? Like we just like plan and just plan and plan and like we're like, okay, we'll do it sometime, but like here's the whole strategy. Like just like do it, like just do it, and like there is planning to be done first, but like you should also like at some point, like if you don't just go and do it, and those plans won't really amount to anything. And even though it's not great to just be coming up with a return policy on the spot, like you know, there's a balance to be hit there.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed talking to you, and we appreciate you doing this interview for the Medium article.
Yeah, of course, no problem.